Over to
Okay,
you, Catherine.
thank you. Thank you, Marianne. And thanks to everybody who's joining us from far and wide. Just a couple other comments about the pre-marathon events. There's an additional one, which will be fun for everyone who's going to be in Sag Harbor. The artist that Marianne mentioned, Scott Bluedorn, whose artwork will be pertaining to whales and the environment for his exhibition in the bookstore, he's created what he has called Labyrinth, which is essentially a labyrinth in the shape of a whale. So that will be, you will be able to walk that labyrinth at the Old Whalers Church from June, it looks like June 5 to June 10. And you will get more details about that. But Scott's incredibly creative, and we're just so thrilled to have his artwork in the store and this labyrinth that he had, that he has created. So tonight we're very pleased to have with us Paul Bresnick and Sena Jeter Naslund, as Marianne had said. It's a thrill for us. We have wanted to have Sena participate in our marathons for some time now. So what to expect, as Marianne said, we'll have a moderated discussion, and then we'll pivot to questions and answers. And since there's so many of us, you can drop your question in the chat if you'd like. You can also use the raised hand icon to ask a question afterward, and I can call on you once they've finished with their discussion. So as many of you know, Sena has published several novels, 7 novels, I believe, and 2 collections of short fiction. Ahab's Wife and Four Spirits, published in 2003, were both named a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. Four Spirits is about the tumultuous civil rights struggle in 1963, and it is set in Birmingham, Alabama. Sena is the writer in residence at Louisville, at the University of Louisville, and the program director for the MFA in writing at Spalding University in Louisville as well. In 2005, the governor named her the Poet Laureate of Kentucky. Her books have a strong focus on women, characters, and historical context. Joining Sena is Paul Bresnick, and Paul is a very
Paul Bresnick.
Paul Bresnick. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Paul. Paul's a stalwart member of our Moby-Dick Marathon Committee. He established his literary agency in 2004. The agency, the Bresnick Weil Literary Agency, has published numerous books. In addition to Ahab's Wife, Paul has published The Second Stage by Betty Friedan, Catch a Fire, The Life of Bob Marley by Timothy White, Drive by Larry Bird, and Unboxing by Joyce Carol Oates. So we're in for a real treat tonight. At this point, I want to turn it over to Paul, who will be in discussion with Sena. So please keep yourself muted, sit back, and enjoy this robust conversation. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's such a thrill to have a chance to talk with Sena. It's been a while, so I'm delighted. So I wanted to start off by reminding you, Sena, as I'm sure you remember, when shortly after I acquired Ahab's Wife, when I was an editor at William Morrow, I had very few editorial comments for you. I mean, the manuscript was brilliant, and it certainly didn't need any meddling from me, but I did have one thing that I asked you, was to please add more Ahab. I couldn't resist that because, this is my favorite character in all literature. And here was an opportunity to have more of him. So I wanted to ask you to, tell us about how you would compose those new passages and how we first met in New York.
Okay, Paul. Am I on?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for all that you've done for me and getting this book into shape and for supporting me with it. I'm deeply appreciative of it. Of course, while you say you had few suggestions, I would not exactly agree with that. I think you sent me a note that had 20 items on it, And I started with the easiest one to answer. I knew I was going to come to see you soon and meet you in person. So I started with the easiest one. So I worked my way through having just one item left, and that was an extended scene between Ahab and his wife, which didn't exist in the text until that time. And I had done everything else, but I couldn't quite do that. And I was hoping not to disappoint you. But there was a layover on my plane trip to New York, and I was in Cincinnati airport, not far from Louisville, but still you have to be there. And I was there reading, I think, an introduction to Moby-Dick, and there was some Latin phrase that just threw my mind into another gear. And suddenly I knew the scene was too long. What I should like to add to this. So I didn't have any paper or anything with me, but I went to the man behind the desk and said, could you give me some paper? And he pulled from one of those giant machines. Then the paper page was about this wide, and I sat down and started by hand writing the scene that I knew you wanted. And this is the scene that I will read to people in a little while. And so I wrote, got on the plane, continued writing, got into New York, went to my hotel room, wrote till 3 o'clock in the morning, although I knew I was going to see you the next day and I had better wind it up. But I just couldn't stop because I wanted to do this scene. And eventually I got it done. And of course, it was all scribbled and, it wasn't in pristine form. I revised it many times and had all kinds of errors. And so when I went to your office, we'd never seen each other before. We chatted, and I said, well, I had written that scene just finely, but it was in bad form, so I would have to read it aloud to you. You couldn't possibly read this handwritten scrawl. So I did. I'll read it to you. You were sitting over here, and I had my eyes glued on the many revisions, trying to keep my place. And I was really scared, silly, and I didn't know whether this was going to work or not. And then finally, I got to the end of it. It was fairly long, and turned to look at you. And there were tears in your eyes. And you said, it's even better than I ever hoped for. And I, of course, nearly fainted with joy. The way you felt about it, because I felt it was good too. And it had sort of come as a gift from the muse when I was desperate and not needing it. So that's, we got off to a very good start with each other in that way.
So Sena, can you read that to all of us now?
I will read it to you with much pleasure.
Great,
So,
that would be wonderful.
here we go. To those of you who are familiar with the book, this turned out to be chapter 114, and it's on page 508 in my part. And this reading runs about, what did I say, maybe 15 minutes or so. So I'll read it to you now. Chapter 114, The Birthing Room. I stood outside Ahab's door to listen, to hear him breathe. Rapidly, pantingly, like a man at hard labor, he gasped the air and spat it out. So savage his breathing was, I thought his teeth grasped air and gnashed it into his lungs. I heard myself whimper as though I were nicked. No light escaped from under the door. Darkness sealed the scene. My knees weakened, and I feared I would buckle in prayer before his closed door. He must have heard my whimper, for he said, there's a kind of divinity and madness. You have it in you. The password's madness. I said, madness. May I come in? Aye, he whispered. And then more to himself than to me, my wife makes me say aye, and I would never say the word again. No, in thunder, no. But not to Una. No, for her, Ahab says no to no. Come in. I saw him on the narrow bed, disarrayed, new blood on the bandage of the stump. You must close the door, he said, and abide with me in darkness. I closed the door and waited in the Stygian gloom. Speak, goblin, he said. No goblin, Una, your wife. There are only goblins here, he said. Then I am a goblin. I could see nothing at all. One line of light behind my heels. Let me stay. We were silent a moment, he on the bed, I standing. I heard him moving in the covers. I've made a place, he said, so gently I trembled. He patted the bed. Here, wife, come sit beside me. My hand found his hard as brick hand, and I remembered how he had comforted me on the moor, merely by taking my hand. The truth blurted from me. I would not be afraid to die if I held your hand, I said. Like a vice, his clamped mine and took it to his lips. I would kill death, he murmured, before he could take ye. No, I'd not wait like Orpheus and then try to harrow hell. No, I'd stand before you, Eurydice. No death for ye, Una. And he kissed my hand and fingers again. His breath was hot. He began to pant and groan like a low surf filling the room. Let me touch thee and heal thee, I implored. Ah, Christ visits in the darkness. His tone bit like vinegar in a wound. No, as a wife, I would soothe you as your wife. He held my hand even tighter, took my fingertips between his lips. Beyond the visible, he murmured, the whale has dismasted me. I leaned over and kissed his face, but he became still as a corpse. I sat erect again. A gasp like a sob escaped him, and my chest heaved with sobs. I stifled as best I could. Una, his voice had the quality of the purest, quietest brook in the woods. I would tell ye a thought of mine. He hesitated. I would listen. There is a tragicalness in being human, in the mere being. Yes, I wanted to say, but that is only one way. There are many ways we choose. Because, Ahab went on, a tragicalness in being human, because we are imperfect in strength and power. Without that, choice is an eyeless socket. The promise that man was given dominion over the beasts, the fowls of the air, and the fish of the deep is a false promise. There are secrets God keeps from himself. Perhaps his omnipotence is a sham. The wounds of Christ speak of his compassion for humanity, but what message would my wound impart? I have the spark of an idea. In this dark hole, I've seen a spark of reason in the chaos of unreason. He hesitated, then mused. Is this fear of Una I'm feeling? Fear of me? I felt the cube of blackness around me. 2 brave fingers, he said, can snuff out any spark. You have a mind stronger than any thumb and forefinger. I will not have ye snuff out my little idea. It must be fanned into a flame, a conflagration. Remember, we stood above time at South Tyrol and watched the world burn. It rained, I said. Ahab sighed. And so you'll not listen? I'll listen. I fastened my eyes on the slender light burning under the door. I had promised silence, acquiescence. He said, man perishes, but so long as he breathes, he insists on dealing with all powers on an equal basis. If any of these other powers choose to withhold certain secrets, why we err, suffer, die, let them. That does not impair my sovereignty and myself. That does not make me tributary. Ahab stopped. I was forbidden to cross his speaking, nor would I extinguish any consoling idea. He listened to my silence. No addendum, he asked. Then he mumbled to himself. He has astonished me, but I will yet astonish him. He paused. Astonish. What is its Latin root? Tonare, to thunder. There's thunder and astonishment. He turned his mouth toward me. That lance of light, it blinds me. I'll cover it. I reached to the foot of the bed for an unused blanket. Go out, he said. Leave me to think, dear one. Cover the crack from the outside. As I obeyed, my wool muffled out the light and sealed in his words. Madness is undefinable. It and right reason, extremes of one. And I read on, chapter 115, the leg. We soak the tender flesh of the stub in seawater to help it toughen and callous. My pride when he could bear to be fitted again with the ivory peg. My pain to see it there, more permanent seeming than any real leg. Ahab would walk again, but how angrily he trod his world. That he had once been whole and competent and now was imperfect and clumsy, all but brought despair. Anger, it seemed, was his only antidote to despair, not love, not even pride in justice, our son. As soon as he could, Ahab stalked the beach. If I see water, I am there, he told me. I am about my business. In the white foam, I see the forehead of Moby-Dick. I begged to walk with him. He replied, revenge is ever solitary, isolating. He looked at me as though I grew strange and remote. But 10 days before the Pequod was to sail, he fell on the rocks and was brought home, bleeding again. Carry him upstairs to our bedroom, I directed. Treacherously, my heart rejoiced. Now he could not sail, not on schedule. I could try again to calm, distract, dissuade, persuade, beg him to be content that he was alive. The bleeding of the stump bloomed like a rose through bandage after bandage. Staunch it, he cried, staunch it with fire. Mrs. Maynard, our helper, horrified, backed up against the door. Throw wood on the fire, I ordered, and set the poker in it. She fluttered about the room, her hand at her throat. Seeing her consternation, Ahab said calmly, leave my wife and me alone. She was glad to flee. As I pressed a pad to his wound, Ahab and I watched the glow of the metal. It's white now, he mused, white as Moby-Dick. I could not move. Now, his voice rang, now. And I grabbed the iron and rolled its hot tip over the flesh, searing and sealing the rawness. That roar, myself, not Ahab. When he was better, I begged him to wait at least till the new year, a mere week later, but he would not. He said, how do you know I will improve? I may fall again and be utterly wrecked. My vengeance, never accomplished. He spoke, propped up in bed. I thought his head seemed grateful for the soft pillow behind it. He was beautiful in the white bed, his head framed by the lace of the pillowcase. If you do not try to walk on your regular rocks on the beach, Ahab will go where Ahab decides to go. And he did not speak unkindly, but patiently, for he loved me. I'm sure he loved me then. Note this, he reached in the pocket of his nightshirt and held up a slender glass tube closed with a cork. This sand of Nantucket. I scooped it up just before that minion of Moby-Dick betrayed me. The whale's minion, the leg, he pointed to the spare one, a disembodied bone standing in the corner. I do not trust the ivory. 'Twas the devil cousin of this new bone that betrayed me. My head dashed against stone, driftwood, found senseless, brought home senseless. Stem the tide, the rage of Ahab would not be stemmed. He had no wish to harm me. I was battered by his raging, bruised into quietness. His fingers shook as he pointed at the new leg standing in the corner. 'Twas the shaft that bruised the groin. It was my splintered leg that sent me back, groaning to bed for these last days before my leaving. It did not pierce the groin, no, but mocks me freshly to incapacity all the same. Yes, that incapacity so gores my spirit. But here's Nantucket. He waved the vial from his pocket. Though Moby-Dick send me to the ocean floor, I shall triumph. Remember that. I shall be buried in Nantucket soil. You could have a wooden leg, I said. You could pursue every whale, but Moby-Dick. Nay, nay. He contemplated the vial of sand. Moby-Dick is the king of dragons, and too many Nantucket privateers. He's devoured too many of us. Let some younger knight take up the battle, I said. I could have bitten off my tongue to say such a thing. Nights as he lay beside me, he had muttered, injury or age? And I had kissed his face slowly and more slowly till he slept. Now he looked at me, now his face softened. My girl wife, he said quietly. I stepped toward him, my tears ready to fall. Stay, he held up his hand, his gaze moved back to that ivory leg in the corner, a virgin leg yet untried. No, it is ivory bone of his bone that will carry me to revenge. Suddenly he raged again. What is revenge but extravagant justice? He did not look to me for answer. He opened his own jaw, curled down his lips, showed his lower teeth, became what he hated, the sperm whale. His body grotesquely lunged itself upward as far as it could, as Leviathan heaves itself from water to air, yet twists its body, eyes its adversary. Moby-Dick, vanquished, dead. Ahab sank back into his bed, his gaze still fastened on the leg standing in the corner. I stepped between him and the bone. Ahab, husband, my voice shook, not with fear for him, but fear of failing to persuade him. Only the words of my father came to me, vengeance is mine, I will repay, thus saith the Lord. Yes, Ahab said, exhausted by his passion, and closed his eyes. I will repay. Something like the smile he had always reserved for me rippled over his lips. I think we'll stop there.
Brava.
Did you
Thank
remember
you.
it? Did you remember it that
Yes,
way?
I remember. I'm holding back the tears again.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I want to go back to your relationship to Moby Dick prior to your writing Ahab's Wife, and what was the genesis of Ahab's Wife?
Well, I have to go far back to reach the real root, the real genesis of that. I was a great reader as a child. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and we had a wonderful public library that I could get to on the bus. And then I was reading all the books whose either titles or authors I recognized because I wanted to be educated. And I thought if I had heard of this, it must really be famous. And so Moby Dick fell into my hands under that flag. And then I went.
How old were you when you read Moby Dick the first time?
Well, I was younger than in the 9th grade because I wrote a book report on it when I first went to high school, which started in 9th grade at that time in Birmingham. We had 1 through 8 and then 9 through 12. Was it 12? Yeah, I guess so. And so I wrote my first book report on Moby Dick in the English class. And the teacher, Miss Ellis, said to me, are these your ideas or those of some art critic? I was stunned by her question. First of all, I didn't know what an art critic was, but I knew this was literature. And so literature must be some kind of art. And I was delighted with that idea. And then she had mentioned a critic. And that meant that somewhere, somebody had written something about this book that I might be able to read. And so I was very enlightened by her question about whether my ideas had been those of an art critic. I learned about art and critics in an accessible way. And I just said quietly, no, I wrote it myself. And she accepted that. And she didn't look anymore about it. We just went on. So that was my very memorable occasion. I was quite surprised to be asked that question. And so I remember that edition that I checked out from the library had the Rockwell Kent illustrations, and they were very helpful to me in reading the book. But they were also, some of them at the heads of chapters were in sort of Art Nouveau style that I didn't understand visually. And that was disturbing to me. I thought, well, this is not the way it looks. Why is he making it look so strange? And,
Excuse me, Sena, I just want to interject. We tried to kind of recreate the Rockwell Kent feel in the book Ahab's Wife, right? And we
yes.
commissioned an artist to do etchings, and there are illustrations that appear throughout, just like in the Rockwell Kent.
That is just wonderful. That was a delight that came unexpectedly to me when we said, and we want to have illustrations. And I had read the contract, and I knew it said that the author would pay for any illustrations. And so I asked you about that. I said, well, how much will I have to pay? And you said, hold on. and you were away for about 2 minutes, and you came back on the line and said, "We'll pay." And you all did, the company.
Oh, there you go. There, Marianne is holding up one of those full-page illustrations. They're beautiful.
They're wonderful illustrations. They could not be better. They're absolutely.
So Sena, bring us to when you conceived this notion of creating a book around this one. It's the sole reference in the entire book. It's one sentence in Moby Dick.
Well, this happened sometime later. I had written other books, and I had traveled some with the books, and I had traveled some with my daughter, Flora, and just she and I would be driving, and she would be sitting beside me. I remember one trip we made to Atlanta, and we listened to all of the Beethoven symphonies. And when Flora heard the chorus come in the last movement of the ninth singing, she said, "I want to do it. I want to do it. Teach me how." And I said, "Well, it's German. I hardly know any German." She said, "You can learn." and I couldn't stop the car at that moment, but I did learn, and I did teach her, and she did learn to sing it in German. And then something else happened on another car trip. We were going to Arkansas to visit cousins on that trip. And then we were listening to books on tape that were somewhat abridged. And of course, one of the ones we listened to was Moby-Dick. And Flora fell in love with the scene where Ahab nails the doubloon to the mast and says, "Whoever sights Moby-Dick first gets this." And she memorized some of that, and she would say it when it was off the phone. And I was very surprised that a little girl, she was maybe 10 years old or 11 years old, would so love the voice of Ahab. And I thought, well, I might just read that book again and see what I think. And so I did. And the Moby Dick began to haunt me. And then I was in Boston, and one of my Godine books had come out, and I was feeling very good. Everybody was so nice to me. It was already a dream come true. And as I was driving a little rented car, which was a very special thing for me to have the courage to drive this rented car in Boston. And all of a sudden, I saw a woman on the roof walk, looking out to sea, hoping that her husband would be coming home. And I recognized her to be Ahab's wife. And I thought, that will happen near the end of my book. And so it was just a gift from the unconscious or whatever. That so that whole speech about Una on the roof walk was really the very first thing that I wrote and was aiming toward. But I didn't want her to have this, that scene as a scene of reconciliation with mortal limitations, and yet feeling that a part of the universe. That's the way that scene resolves itself. It's a consoling scene for Una, who's not conventionally religious in any way, but it's a vision of her own of how she fits in.
So this image you had of a woman on a roof walk looking out and waiting for her husband to return, that was the whole beginning of Ahab's wife.
Yes.
That one image.
And I wrote toward that, and it comes fairly late in the book.
Yeah.
And I wrote,
That's great.
The writing itself of this book took me 4 years. It took 2 years to get the first draft, and then 2 years to revise it. And the first part of it, it took 90 days, because I would write it and every day I would revise it. So it was revised 90 times before I could get on. I knew that because I worked on it every day, and that was on the calendar. It was over the summer that I was able to do that. So
it took how long to write the book?
4 years. 2 years to get the first draft, and then no, I'm fine, thank you. It took two years. My dear son-in-law asked if I need some water, but I'm just choking up over these memories of these days, and to be able to share them with Paul, very special. So, every day, every one of those 90 days, I thought I had it. At the end of every single session, I thought, now I've got it, I can move forward. And the next day I would say, no, it's not there. And this happened 89 times. But I was always joyful because every single time I believed I had done it. And then finally, one day it was the day and I could move on.
Yeah. So I wanted to remind everyone here that that the theme of this year's Moby-Dick Marathon is women and Moby-Dick. And I wanted to ask Sena, what does Moby-Dick say to you as a woman, and what do you think it means to women in general? What does it offer? What does it have to offer women? Because it's mainly a male-centered book. So can you talk a little bit about women in Moby-Dick and your relationship?
Yes. Well, I did, of course, note that Ahab had a wife, and she had a rather small part in Moby-Dick. But he does say some very focused things about her. And I knew that he loved her and that she meant a great deal to him. There's one passage when he's talking to Starbuck, and he says, "Close, Starbuck, stand close to me. Let me look into
a human eye.
'Tis better than to gaze upon sea or sky. 'Tis better than to gaze upon God. By the green hearth, by the something I see, my wife and child in thine eye." And that's an expression of wonderful love for his family. And seeing that made me think I could write the book, that he had a human touch. He calls her, in one sense, a poor girl, which I just throw that out of my memory. She didn't need his pity, but that treasuring of her made me think, well, I will create a character worthy of being treasured in that way. I mean, his relationship to her was what he had of salvation, of a reason for being or believing in anything but nightmare. So,
yeah, but a lot of women are intimidated by Moby-Dick, the book, right? What can we say that the book has to offer for women?
Well, honestly, it's hard for me to make these gender distinctions among readers. I mean, we all have a bit of the other gender about our psyches, and I think we go to it from time to time as we please or as it imposes itself on us. I grew up with two older brothers, and I was part of their world and they were part of my world. And I just don't live in a world of these hard divisions, and really never have. And as a child,
Okay.
I boxed with boxing
Okay.
gloves.
No, I noticed that we have a lot of questions on the chat, so maybe we should try to wind up here. But before we get to the questions, Sena, I wanted to ask you about what you've recently written and what you're working on now.
Oh, okay. Well, I've just finished a book that in a sense grows out of this book, Ahab's Wife, in that while I was researching Nantucket and who was there, I ran across the piece of information that Frederick Douglass gave his maiden speech at the Athenaeum in Nantucket, introduced by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which was told to me as I went to that very same podium stand to read from my book.
Yes, I was there.
Yes, I know you were there. I remember well. But let's see, what was your question, Paul?
Well, talk about this book about Frederick Douglass that you just finished.
Yes. So I found in some newspaper thing that he had given a speech there, And I thought, well, I want to write about Frederick Douglass. And then it seemed to me that I needed to give him a context. And of course, he did meet Lincoln a few times in the latter years. They had 3 meetings while Lincoln was president. But in some ways, their growing up was similar. They studied the same book on oratory for boys, for example. And then I thought, to make this complete, I need to write about Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. So my newest novel is called Before the War. That means before the American Civil War. And I deal with each of those 3 characters in their youth. The title Before the War is there. I don't go into the Civil War, but up to it, seeing those characters. My question is, how did they become the people they became? And I also deal with each of their wives too. So it's another huge book that I have just cut down from 1,100 typescript pages to 895. So that's what I've been doing recently.
Okay. And you just sent it to your, it doesn't have a publisher yet, right?
No, it's not out yet. So we'll see what happens. But also I've taken to writing libretto for opera. My partner, Gerald Plain, is a composer, a prize-winning composer. And we've just done an operatic version of the folk ballad Pretty Polly, which is a seduction and murder ballad. So we've had a wonderful time doing that, as well as this new book.
Well, as you know, my daughter's name is Polly, so
I do know that, and I thought when I mentioned this, just divorce the idea from the fact that it's a murder book. I mean, it's a murder ballad.
All right. Yeah. So Catherine, I think maybe we should start trying to deal with some of the questions.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you both for a wonderful conversation. We have a question from somebody who's actually on the call, but they posted it to me via email. It's from Alamgir Hashmi, who is in Islamabad, Pakistan. And the question is, do you think the subtitle or the alternative title or the Stargazer has received sufficient attention from readers?
Oh, Alamgir Hashmi, hello to you. You were my student many years ago at the University of Louisville, and I'm so glad to hear from you and where you are. Thank you for tuning in on all of this. And let's see now, the question was, Paul.
It's about your subtitle or the Stargazer.
Yes, of course, the Stargazer. Well, the penultimate scene in this is Una on the roof walk looking at the stars. And so it ties in that way in terms of a payoff scene. And I used it as part of the title in a way, in an attempt to underline that this was an important event for her. It's not an important physical event, it's a psychological event. One might even say a spiritual event for her on the roof walk. So that's why I wanted to give it that prominence, to kind of guide the prominence of being part of the title, to kind of anticipate and guide the reader and make the reader wonder, okay, when's she going to pay off on this Stargazer business?
Yeah, right. Now, isn't the title page illustration, isn't that the Stargazer?
It is. It is. I used it as the frontispiece of the book. It's Una on the roof walk looking at the stars. And
there, Marion. Yeah.
Yes, there it
is. Yeah. Okay.
But I guess the question really revolved around, do you think it's gotten the attention that it deserves? So I'm not sure if you could address that, but I just thought I'd put that right back out there.
Whether the subtitle has gotten the attention it deserves? Most people have not paid much attention to it. I would agree. And even today, when I looked at it, I thought, well, did I really need that title, or should it have been there? So I'll have to leave that question open as to whether it was a good choice or not. You let me do it, Paul, so it's partly your fault.
No, it echoes, Moby-Dick or the whale, Ahab's wife or Stargazer.
You're so right. And I probably thought of that too back then, and I've just forgotten it. But you're so right. He had a subtitle. Why shouldn't I have a subtitle?
That's right.
So I see Tracy Robinson has a question. She can unmute herself and ask it. And then after that, Nathan Gower does as well. So Tracy,
Thank you all.
Tracy, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please do so. And okay, so if not, we will go to Nathan, and then Jody has her hand raised. We'll go to her after Nathan.
Great.
Hello, Sena.
Hello.
I'd love to be on this call with you. I adore your books, as you know. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about what it's the courage it takes to write books with based on such well-known source material, so like Moby-Dick or historical figures, Marie Antoinette, and if that source material or writing to those historical figures is ever a point of intimidation for you.
No. I find them so attractive and so full of promise and the desire to explore and get as close to understanding something, even if it's not right, that I feel almost a magnetic attraction to the material and a curiosity and knowing that I don't know and exploring and trying to find out what feels, and that's a very loose word, I guess, what feels right to me at the time. And I don't have it all planned out. It's always a lot of surprises for me along the way and twists and turns, but that's probably one reason I have to revise so heavily and spend so much time in revision is because I'm very hospitable to myself. And I even say this, Nathan, to some of my students who have a hard time getting going. I say, write a sentence, and after you have, say, good, I did it. I wrote a sentence. Now another. And I have actually talked myself into writing many times by that conversation with myself that's affirming and tries to push away feelings of inadequacy and worried about what so-and-so might say later on. And all of that. It's me and imagination and what's inspiring me and my desire to do right by the inspiration, to fulfill it some way.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Jody has her hand raised, so please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, Sena.
Hello, Jody. It's so nice to see you.
Great to see you too, and lots of other people here. So I wish everybody would put their faces on so we could.
Where are you, Jody?
I'm in Rhode Island.
Okay.
Sena, I want to ask about your feminist self. I was so intrigued to hear you say that Una really came from your sense that Ahab loved his wife and that you were trying to create this full character deserving of his love. I look at so much of your work and I think, were you at all? I'm wondering how you came into your feminist self, first of all, from your childhood onward. But you tell these brave, remarkable, full, rich stories about women that haven't been told. And this happens in all of your novels. And I'm wondering about, are you really just trying to create these characters that are worthy of the men's love they have received? Or is there also a part of you that's really saying these stories are very, very important and I need to tell them? I wondered if you would address that.
Well, the latter is true, that I think these are stories that are important or might be important. And the least I can do is to try to tell them. But I grew up in a family, as I said, with two older brothers, and we all played with all the neighborhood children in the summer under the street lights. And I didn't feel a sharp definition as being a girl and that being limited in the family that I grew up in. And of course, I'm grateful for that now. My next older brother, John Jeter, taught me how to imagine. And how can you not be grateful for that? But he said, here's the piano bench and here's the vanity. We're putting these cushions on them. And these are our saddles and we're going to ride the range together. And so we put the cushions on the benches and we began to ride the range together. And so that was a very wonderful invitation to imagining, and to imagining in tandem with a masculine person just beside me. And that was sort of the discovery in my imagination. I remember his doing that for me. And then I played with Nancy June Brooks more, and we made up stories constantly, often about Tarzan and Cheetah. She liked to play Cheetah. I did not like to play Cheetah. And, you know, we were full of imagination, and we just made up stories constantly all the time. And, you know, I like to be boy, and that, well, that might be subliminally looking for a better role than being girl, but well, there was no girl in the story. I didn't do it, I think, as an excuse, but instead just as my territory too, if I wanted it.
You know, if I could just follow up from there, I mean, it's interesting to hear your memories of when you were younger, but as a young adult, could you talk a little bit about how you maybe came into considering yourself a feminist, if you do indeed, or when did that happen in terms of your own maturing and your literary, your creative person?
I'm certainly a feminist, and I just always have been by nature. I've, you know, I have friends who are men and friends who are women, and I don't know, I've had a very easy time on that score, I guess, about not feeling put down because I was a girl. I just didn't ever feel that. But something that gave me a lot of confidence really were my teachers, especially in high school, besides the one who thought I might not have written my book report on Moby-Dick. But as I say, she accepted my explanation that I had written it myself. But then the next year in 10th grade, I had a teacher at Phillips High School in Birmingham, Alabama, named Leslie Moss. And we read Shakespeare, Julius Caesar in that class. And then she picked out a number of things that happened off stage that we could write about. And she didn't say how long it should be or could be. So I picked out the phrase, she swallowed fire, which happens to the wife of Brutus. It means she committed suicide by swallowing poison. I didn't know it was not literal at the time. So I thought, yes, I can make all of that up about how she came to do that. So I sat down and started doing it. And 19 pages later, I finished, which was, she didn't say how long or short it could be. She just said, do it. And then when I got it back, she had typed it all up and said, now we're going to read this in class. But more important, when she handed back my paper, it had the grade on it of A+++++. And it was a literal feeling that the ceiling of the classroom pushed away, and there was the sky. There was the sky, and I could be there. I hadn't known that anything was better than A+. And here I had A++++, and I can do anything. So, and it was easy, and I loved doing it. And so that, I mean, she just gave me a wonderful open door, and I walked right through it, and you know, continued to do that and to work with her, and she encouraged me in my writing. So yeah, I was lucky not to have to fight for myself. The world just opened to me as a woman and as a girl writer.
That's great. Well, teachers are really angels and servants for the good, to be sure. I think Polly Curtis, who is on the call, has a question to ask. So Polly, if you want to unmute yourself. Oh. Well, maybe she's
She probably had to go. We're talking.
stepped away. But before, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to bring it back to an earlier part of the conversation, Sena, when you mentioned your daughter being transfixed in reading Moby Dick at a young age by the segment where the doubloon is nailed to the mast. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because every year every time we do a marathon, we pick a particular image to kind of focus in on for the marathon. The last time we did the face tattooing of Queequeg, and we've done other things in the past. But this year, the doubloon is the image that we are focusing on. Marianne is actually holding up the logo in her window. So did your daughter ever fully explain to you what about that really caught her imagination?
No, I never quizzed her about that, and I was fascinated by her interest in it. It had actually been a scene that I had not particularly liked. And if I had been editing the book for a young listener, I probably would have left it out.
That's very funny. That's very interesting. Well, it is a pivotal moment, obviously, in the book to get everybody to swear the allegiance to fighting for this doomed mission. So if that a young person would kind of pick up on that, I think is kind of interesting. So I think Polly is now back, and maybe if she would like to unmute herself and ask the question, please do so.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Polly, I
Yeah.
can hear you.
Ah, great. Thank you so much. This is really, really so special for me to be part of. I'm here with my daughter and trying to listen while I spend time with her as well. I had a question, Sena. I had no idea that your partner was a musician and that you were collaborating with him in this way. And I'm interested in how writing in a musical way is different or the same, or what the overlaps are for you with fiction.
Yes, I find it much easier than writing fiction. You can have so few words, and the music is there to help you and support you and do all of that. And everything for me as a writer becomes a little more basic, that you've got to say a lot in a short amount of time with few words. You know, to sing something takes a lot more time than to say something. And so there's the pressure of economy, but also the spotlight is so much on the words. You know, it's a bit more demanding that you make. Well, I wouldn't say it's more demanding. It's at least as demanding to make every utterance earn its keep. And when I revise, that's the pressure I put on the sentence, whether it's a sentence in a libretto for Polly Pretty Polly, or whether it's a sentence in the book I'm writing, I've just finished, Before the War. It does every word in the sentence earn its keep, and if not, I have to get rid of them and or find substitutes. And so I think that there's a compression in writing for an opera that you don't have when you have limitless pages as a novelist. Actually, I'm often asked to shorten my work. I'm sort of gabby, as you may have noticed. So when I feel like I'm looking at a friendly face, otherwise not. Anyway, does that help me? I hope, Polly.
Thank you so much. It does. And I've just so enjoyed hearing you share and speak about your process and revision. It's really inspiring to hear the way you talk about it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just put out there to see if there's any other questions that people might have. You can, again, use the raised hand icon. And while you're thinking about that, I want Sena to know that Joanne James posted in the chat that, she's been fascinated with Frederick Douglass, and she's happy that you're going to be writing a book about him. He's one of her heroes. So I don't know, Joanne, if you're with us, if you wanted to say something to that point, but I want Sena you to know that she's taken note of your next book and can't wait to read it.
Well, thank you, Joanne. My book follows the life of Frederick Douglass through his return from England. You know, he published his own book while he was still legally a slave. He could have been forced back into slavery. So his support group sent him to England, and he met many of the luminaries there, and the Quaker women in England bought his freedom, although he was against philosophically the idea of ending slavery by buying people, but he did agree to that in this case, and of course that allowed him to come back to the United States and really expand his influence on the culture in a great way.
Sena, what's the title of your Frederick Douglass book?
It's called Before the War, but remember.
Oh, right, you said that, right.
It has Lincoln and Jefferson Davis and all their wives too, because I'm interested in you know, their teen years and their sense of sexuality and what their relationship or not to religious belief was a problem in Lincoln's family because he was a non-believer and his father was a very literalist sort of person. So these are really novels of what is the word? Novels of maturation. That sort of
Bildungsroman.
Bildungsroman, exactly. Thank you. Yes, this new book is definitely in that category for each of the characters. And after they're sort of, shall we say, formed, I'm through with them. Well, I guess that's an in joke. I don't know. Thank you all for laughing. Who could be through with some of those great characters? You know, you can never be through with them, never.
Indeed, indeed. Listen, thank you both so very much. I see no other hands being raised, so I just want to let people know that if they want to read in the marathon, you can sign up. You only read for 10 minutes, and it's a wonderful experience. And I posted a link in the chat for you to fill out a Google form to register to read. It's June 9th to the 11th. Please join us even if you don't want to read, and get a look at different locations in Sag Harbor. We read at the Old Whalers Church, we read at the Whaling Museum, we read at the library, we read at Eastville Historical Community Society, which is the African American Historical Society in Sag Harbor. So it's a wonderful community-wide event. And of course, it is also a fundraiser, so there's a link there if you would like to. Please give us some support for our nonprofit Canio's Cultural Cafe. And we do have signed book plates that we can, if you want a copy of Ahab's Wife, we can get that to you. Just call us or send us an email. But it's been a real treat to have both Sena and Paul here shepherd us along on our own voyage toward the beginning of the marathon. Thank you all. If you want to unmute yourself and give everybody some applause, that would be great. And if not, Marianne, I'll send it over to you if you would like to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just again to repeat, this is such a special event for us, and this book is such a special book. It came out around the time Catherine and I first took over the bookshop. We ordered the book intrigued by the title, and shortly thereafter, I believe we met Paul for the first time, who came to an event, saw the book either on the front desk or in the window, and was regaling us with his important connection to the book. So we feel like we've been living with this book for so long, and just going back to it again and again as we read Moby-Dick, and then we say, well, folks, there's Ahab's wife. So we're just delighted to have you with us, Sena, after all this time, and perhaps we will meet again. Indeed, we look forward to the new book, and I want to thank all of our guests this evening, and hope some of you who are in the area or can travel to our area will join us for our marathon reading. But Sena, it's such an honor and a delight to be with you. Paul, thank you for your guidance, and thanks to everyone who joined our event.